Hi, and welcome to Heartfelt Consciousness with my Vinyasa practice. My name is Michelle Young, and today I'll be interviewing Lauri Nemetz, a world-renowned anatomist, yoga teacher, and dissector. Lauri just released a book, The Myofascial System in Form and Movement. And Lauri has been honored and privileged to work on many dissection projects, including the Plastinization Project in Germany. Today, we'll talk to Lauri about her experience and journey with yoga, as well as her work as an anatomist and dissector. And we'll learn a little bit more about her book and her upcoming lab with Leslie Kaminoff in Colorado Springs. Let's meet Lauri.
Hi, and welcome to my Vinyasa Practices Heartfelt Consciousness podcast. Today we have Lauri Nemetz with us, and we are thrilled to have her on because we will be spending some quality time with Lauri here in a couple of months at the Cadaver Lab. Lauri and Leslie Kaminoff and Lydia Mann host a Cadaver Lab, and we went last year and we're just blown away. So we're super excited to do it another time. Lauri, welcome.
Thank you so much. So happy to see you and be here with your community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Lauri, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about how you got into yoga.
Okay. Yeah, that goes way back. I actually, undergrad was art history French major, but always was a mover and everything else. When I went into grad school, which was the early 90s, I go way back, and I went for dance movement therapy. I still hold my licensing in dance movement therapy. And at the time, as you know, too, there wasn't as much widespread yoga practice. It was definitely some fabulous teachers all around. And it was around the time of grad school, I really took my deep dive into yoga. And it felt like home. It always had that space for me. And, I became president of the Yoga Teachers Association East Coast for a while, all sorts of other things, but I took a really deep dive around that time of graduate school. So that's how I kind of, dipped my feet into it and have been part of the yoga world ever since.
That's awesome. I mean, it's just such a vast and expansive world, right? There's so many opportunities to really become embodied and learn what it's like to be human through this practice. So tell me a little bit more about how yoga fits into your current professional career.
All right. Actually, yeah. And it's interesting because a lot of people know me as the anatomy dissector, and that is definitely a huge part of my world these days. But I spend as much time still teaching yoga. And even at Pace University, which is my home campus where I am, I also teach as a visiting associate professor at Rush Medical in Chicago. But on my home campus, although I teach anatomy there and I teach myofascial anatomy, I'm actually really known some point during the whole time people are there, they have me as their yoga teacher. At some time in their college career. I see almost everybody on campus, whether for the academic yoga class or for the non-credit class or community classes that I lead there too. And I still teach out there and also do a lot of privates. Also, registered as under certification for yoga therapy. So I wear still a lot of hats in the yoga world. And like I said, it just has remained this place of home for me. So really powerful and something I continue to do quite a lot.
Yes, you definitely have a very diverse yoga career. And I think that's one of the things that inspires me is that it's not just yoga, but it's not just academics, or it's not just it's this whole experience, which again, I think is just a beautiful metaphor for the practice. It is about the wholeness, right?
Absolutely.
Of what we're doing.
Not to be too cliche, but it really is all connected. And we know this in yoga. And I think too, yoga informs my anatomy work, anatomy informs my yoga work, certainly. So those connections are really there. You know, whether we're talking about patterns and talking about samskaras or doing any of that sort of thing, they're there whether I'm looking at it with my eye as a dissector or looking at it from the viewpoint of yoga. Yep.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So tell me a little bit more about dissecting and how that has influenced your life and sort of integrates into this passion you have for embodied movement.
Great. Yeah, and I'm so thrilled, as you mentioned, we're doing these labs. Leslie Kamenoff, we've known each other for several decades now, I think since the early 90s as well, that we had bumped into each other's worlds, particularly in the yoga sphere. And I came out of, like I said, I have this art background, as well as everything else, this high movement background and study. So when I fell into dissection work, and at the time, I think, as you know, your listeners may know, I taught for anatomy trains for about a decade and also taught in their dissection labs for about a decade. And actually, Tom, initially, when I was interested in dissection, and I know him from about 2 decades past, said, oh, go out to Gil Headley and then go to these other more academic places. So I did that, and Gil and I remain greatly in touch all these many years later, and I went to many of his labs. I did also do Mount Sinai, special courses at Mount Sinai in New York. And then I fell into also teaching, the anatomy trains dissections and Todd Garcia's lab. Taught there for a long time, and then was part of projects like the Fascia plastination project. So got to travel to Germany to be part of the team, the international team that dissected our first fascia-focused plastinet that is out there. And then I've guested in other places as well. Rush Medical too, that's been such a joy. So I think too, it was a combination of, and this is something important to me. I'm not having the words really readily right here, but I do like good conversation and I like speaking between people. So I like learning the medical language so I can speak with the medical professionals and translate what we do in yoga to that, or for us in movement. We're very visual learners oftentimes, and being able to reference languaging in a different way and how all these people can intersect with each other, I just find fascinating. So that's a little bit in there. And like I said, I think I had a natural ability in dissection, partly because of my art background, partly because I fell into following some really amazing dissectors myself, Carla Steckos, another friend and colleague out there, and to be able to watch different people's techniques, but also decide how I wanted to incorporate all of that work is really, really important. And you've seen that in lab as well. I like getting other people excited. You have a natural talent and ability in there in dissection lab, and it's lovely to see that unfold when people start to learn that the scalpel can be that paintbrush and a way to see into the body and experience and connect things together in ways you might not have thought of before. That's exciting.
It is exciting. And I think, you have such a fresh perspective, Lauri, and that's what I've been really drawn to. And part of the reason, obviously Leslie's one of my teachers, but wanting to come back a second year was large in part because of your technique and the way that you weave art into it. And trying to describe it to a listener feels like, almost impossible. But when we're in lab, it really is, it's almost like a multimedia project, right? And we're working with multiple different mediums to really learn, but also experience the beauty, the natural beauty of the human form, of nature, of that macrocosm being reflected in the microcosm. And I really loved it so much that it's not really so much for me about the gifts of the donor as much as it is about being able to witness and experience the universe unfolding right there before our very eyes. It's just magical.
It is. And you put that so very well. I think too, a lot of people have nervousness about going into lab, and this I might speak to some of your audience for, but very quickly that fear is, changed over by just wonder and, the beautiful thing that you're seeing in front of you and the exploration. And as you know, I tend to liken it to a lot of times to rivers, to tree branches, to whatever, because there is, as you said, such a reflection, inner and outer world. And how cool is that? How much does that make sense to us from the yoga world that, these things do echo other places in life? I think that's just astounding and beautiful. And, part of doing a good dissection, which I always appreciate on many levels, just because then you have, a more well-rounded experience too, but it's respect for the body. And it's showing something too of unfurling this in a creative but profound way that you learn for. It's honoring the gift of the donor in a very, very deep way. So it's kind of an important piece of it too.
Absolutely. No, it was really a remarkable experience. I'm thrilled to go back this year. So I know you just released a book. Tell us a little bit about the book.
In fact, I have a copy here, go figure.
Oh.
It's the myofascial system in form and movement, and has this lovely little swirling cover on it too. And also this book, it has some pictures from our labs, but I chose not to hit too heavy-handed on the dissection pictures for this particular book. Has a lot of pictures and images from nature, from different things echoing in. I don't know how much you can see close up there, but also from some of my contributors doing in movement things and everything else there as well. So that it was meant to be, again, conversation sparker.
Oh, yeah.
You can flip through it and go, oh, that's an interesting picture. What is that about? How do I dive into this a little bit deeper from there? Or you can see somebody's movement sequence and have an interest and a question from that point of view too. So it's meant to be kind of a very interactive book that you can choose to pick up at different times, set down. You can read it cover to cover, but it's also fun to kind of jump around. And I had wanted, I'd been asked to do a book a while ago. The pandemic came in between. There were a number of things that came in between. The publisher, Handspring is still the imprint, which was lovely. They kept it, but got bought by Singing Dragon, bigger publisher under Jessica Kingsley, which has been great. But there were so many changes, as we all know, these last few years. And yet, like I said, throughout it, I could keep some of that vision of the imagery being an important piece of it too, and the connection between all these things. So yeah, I hope people dive into it. I'm really curious to hear more comments. I'm starting to get some of the feedback from around the world, which has been very grateful, very kind. And just had my first book signing too at a local bookstore. That was just lovely. So
Awesome.
it's kind of fun to see. It's terrifying, but kind of fun to see how these things spark for other people. Because I think all of us who are teachers, therapists, all of these things are many different levels. We want that. We want to connect with the world and have the world continue to pass that forwards in different ways. So that's an interesting thing to do with a book as well.
Beautiful. Well, I'm excited to get my hands on it. I'm excited to see how we can leverage it to share some of this wisdom with the yoga therapists we train. And one of the things that I found so remarkable about lab and about the dissection experience was really demystifying a lot of the myths about fascia and, the the most profound thing to me, I think, and Gil does, I think, a little demonstration on this, I've seen, was just how the fascia is literally everywhere, even within the fat on the body. Like it's like everywhere. There's not a place that you don't find it.
Yep, absolutely. And I worked on a decellularization project many years back to first do the hearts and then the kidneys to strip everything away except what was fascia. And this also sparked Gil to do some of the work that he did after that, which was great fun when, again, ideas start to spark along. But what was fascinating was things held shape. So it was really, then this is part of the book stuff too, is just to see what gets shaped by what. And fascia is one of those things that's everywhere, and very much, especially like a decellularized kidney, doesn't look like much when you take it out of a watery environment, but put it back in a watery environment. The whole shape of the kidney is there. The whole form is there.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. And, you know, that's why the image of the orange gets used so much in dissection, because it really is like all those little white segments. We have those big, broad segments in between the individual orange slices, but we also have those teeny tiny circling around each little juice sac and everything else, very much the same way we're in our body in that connected form. So it's not a big leap to go from there and go, okay, now I get it. Why you tug on one part of the body fascially, something else is going to respond, and something always does. So yeah.
One of the things that I teach a lot on is, postural conditioning, how emotional and intellectual holding is sort of imprinted in the body. And when we did this work last year in lab, that was so crystal clear to me, how we just like hold the fascia sort of like gets a little bit dehydrated, and it's sort of like holds around this form. And, it's once that the layers start to be pulled back, we start to realize, well, actually the mobility was always there. There was a holding that was occurring. And so, you mentioned that you are a dance therapist, and I know you and I've actually talked about this on a personal level, and I have not forgotten, but, what comes up for you around that, as we're working with our clients, whether it's a yoga therapist or a dance therapist or a cognitive behavioral therapist, the way the body holds and how we can encourage it to release and encourage the whole system to sort of let go. What comes up for you based on your experience in lab and like actually working with it as a medium, and then working with it in an actual psychosocial situation?
Yeah. No, it's interesting because I'd worked, specialized many years, particularly in trauma work. So when 9/11 happened, when September 11th happened many years ago, I was, at the time, had two little kids. They're grown now, but I had two little ones, but I was pulled back into working actually dance movement therapy because I was one of the few people who had specialized with Holocaust survivors, who had specialized in, all sorts of deep traumas. I'd worked inner city Baltimore and certain areas too that we worked with a lot of different aspects of trauma. So I was pulled in for that work as a dance movement therapist. And the image is in the book as well, that I had published in an article with permission of the client, who is anonymous. But there was a client I had who had painted herself, really pulled inwards, her grief process. And years later, when I was studying with anatomy trainings and with Tom, that collapse of the superficial front line, that thing, and then starting to think about, okay, yeah, more fast twitch fibers in the front of the body, this internal collapse. And what I named at the time with Laba movement analysis and other different ideas, still really held up when I started to dive deeper into fascial anatomy and take a look at, okay, these connections start to make sense, even if it's used as a reference point, an idea box to start to unwind some of this work. So thinking about that too, and I mean, in dance movement therapy, we don't, of course, go from all the way here to, okay, back bends, and that's going to solve everything. That'd be too much too soon, as we know.
Yeah.
But to start to recognize where you start to make the body feel comfortable again, where it starts to work in places of, again, finding ease and a sense of again, comfort in a way that gets taken away sometimes. And so, that started to influence too and crisscross my work even more. So I pulled my new fascial knowledge into my therapeutic work, into my yoga work, into my yoga therapy work, into crisscrossing with different clients that I see. And it was very effective because it started to make sense on multiple levels. And you mentioned in the lab is absolutely true. And I really look at it this way, that sometimes people don't like to talk about layers, but there are kind of these layers in the body, places that separate more easily than others. My brother is a geologist, so I'll give him a little heads up whatever year. Yay, geology too. Same thing, of course, you take a soil sample, it's all connected, but there are places that separate for some reason and, have these different little areas. Same as in the body. And sometimes we unwind patterns. We take that skin layer and reflect it, and we go, oh, wow, that was what was holding the tension. Sometimes it's on more the muscular layer that suddenly you see this like being inside just blossom outwards. Sometimes it's on a deeper layer. So it's really interesting too, but you often, like you said, will find that range of motion comes back. And again, what we know too, when somebody dies immediately is that, everybody expects them to stay stiff. There's a couple of reasons for that. That stiffness doesn't last very long after the death process. And we use unembalmed tissue, partly because we do want to see this range of motion that you see come back. And it's just like if you've ever been under anesthesia, you might hear about too that suddenly, a shoulder that seemed restricted has this wide range of motion that is in there. So is it neurological? Is it held in, where is it held in the tissues? Becomes really fascinating, because often, and this gets back to yoga in so many ways, we have more capability than we realize or think we do. Yeah. So we think we're stuck in here. We think the arm is stuck here, where it may have possibility that is restricted for some reason or another before getting there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that takes us into sort of something that you mentioned in your questionnaire as we prepared for our meeting today, just this idea of perfectionism and letting go of that a little bit. One of the things that comes up for me when I think about this is that when we are locked into this perception of perfectionism, that our awareness is very limited. And the more that we open and we realize the perfection in imperfection and in the experience, it just creates more capacity for awareness, which ultimately gives us more capacity for compassion. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that in your perspective.
Yeah, definitely. I oftentimes remind my yoga students too, whether in the university level or other open classes, it's called yoga practice. Because we're not expected to go into things, hitting the pose perfectly every time or looking extraordinary. I really admire the people that play so much in there that, you fall out of a pose. You want to fall safely. You want to learn how to do that. But if you don't sometimes take those risks, it's really challenging. And I have, even in my academic classes at the university, all my yoga students do final projects. And sometimes they do it on things like yoga and social media, or yoga, and anatomy gets hit hard a lot of times too. But because especially now, a lot of the people hitting university, have always grown up with the constant social media, image in their mind, or that, yoga looks perfect every time that you do it, because they see all these pictures on Instagram and everywhere else, where it's the best of, as it might be best of 50 or best of 100, that have been done to get that one little perfect image. So it sets up a high standard sometimes that isn't realistic with life. Even when we think things are going swimmingly, life puts in lots of challenges. We all have been there with this. And, it's okay to, I think it's really challenging for a lot of people, especially young adults right now, is they sometimes haven't had the permission to fail. Mm-hmm. And everything is recorded and everything is out there for, everybody else to see. Certainly when I grew up, there was a lot of things that nobody recorded. There was no record of. So if you had a fun time or did something that, you might not want to talk about later in life, there wasn't that record to go back to, or that absolute perfectionism. Or also, there was a lot more of, if you didn't get to be number one, that happens sometimes. There's a lot of these days, people give out trophies. It used to drive me nuts when my boys were little that they give out the trophies to everybody. And it's like, first of all, the environmental waste was always like, oh. Yeah. But it was like, it's okay not to win sometimes. Did you have fun? Was it a good game? That's much more exciting to learn good sportsmanship, to learn, any of that, than go, okay, I didn't win. I wasn't, whatever, or that I didn't have a loss. We all have losses. Yeah. That gets back to the lab. People are really hit with the fact, in our culture, we don't see death and dying up close and personal a lot. But it's actually, a lot of people find the experience profound in a lot of ways, because then you can start to cope with some of these feelings.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that there's just so much beauty in that sentiment, and like really going back even to the sutras, like part of the practice is learning to be with what arises as it arises, without needing to change anything, and still maintaining some sense of equanimity in the experience. Right. One of my absolute favorite stories Leslie tells is the enlightenment of the dumpster. It's like, can you just be in equanimity even if that sound is really annoying? Right. And that to me is the practice. And so, again, just like you said, it's all interconnected. Well, I just am so grateful, Lauri, that you took the time to be with us today. I just want to give your book a shout out, The Myofascial System in Form and Movement, by Lauri Nemetz, and check that out. Definitely, whether you are, just getting started in yoga, or whether this has been your lifelong passion and your career, I believe that Lauri has a perspective to offer that is fresh and very metaphoric, and gives us a new lens to look at the body. And for that, Lauri, I'm just very grateful. You are one of my teachers now as well, and I'm just so thrilled to be able to share this space with you.
Oh, thank you so much. And I'm so looking forward to seeing you again and seeing you in lab and your students. The community that you've built is phenomenal, and just give a shout out to you too. I think this is always so great. Part of my thrill is that along the way, I get to meet amazing people like yourself, and it just, it enriches life. So I actually encourage everybody to get out there and plug in more wherever you can. Yeah, absolutely. Believe it or not, Dissection Lab is one of those places you actually, I think, meet up with people, even if your community you already know, in a very lively way. It's a very profound experience about life. And we, as you know, too, take that into movement practice as part of the lab. So it's very much about all of that.
Yes. Oh, I'm so excited. Well, thanks again, Lauri, for being here. Y'all check out Lauri's book, The Myofascial System in Form and Movement. And Lauri, I'm going to see you in a couple months.
I will. Yay. I'm so excited. Thank
Take
you
care.
so much. Take care.
All right. Let me find out how to stop the recording. There we go. Stopping.
Don't forget to check out Lauri's new book, The Myofascial System in Form and Movement. If you're interested in getting to know a little bit more about Lauri, check out her website, www.wellnessbridge.com.